Bruins Beat is brought to you by Fanduel, the exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS Media Network.
And we're here with Conor Ryan, who's presented by our good friends over at Fanduel. Conor, what is up?
Evan, I'm doing well. How you doing?
Doing great. I started my weekend off great. I watched Boston Globe today with you on Friday at 5:00. It was the perfect tone setter for the weekend. I really enjoyed it. Doing a great job. So
thank you very much. I appreciate it.
It was arguably the best TV show I watched throughout the weekend. It's close. I'd say that's number one. But number two was I finished Breaking Bad.
Don't say anything.
I won't. Don't do it. He can't get away with this. Heck of an ending. Heck of a show. Happy I finally finished it. It took me long enough. I know people were like, "Oh, you're taking it 10 years." I watched other stuff. I wish I watched it earlier. That would have been cool. But one of those shows that I'm happy I watched, and hell of a show. That was.
Yes.
I'd say that's up there. I'd say for dramas, that's in top 3 for sure. No order for me. The Wire, Mad Men, and Breaking Bad would be like my top 3. West Wing is a close 4th. Obviously I've never watched The Sopranos. There's other shows I haven't watched, but of the stuff I've watched, I feel like that would be like my three best. So
it's a good tier to be in.
Yeah, it's like S tier. So I can't complain about that. Anyways, you know who we heard from over the weekend that we have not heard from since the end of last season? That was Jim Montgomery. Jim Montgomery sat down with Steve Conroy of the Boston Herald and sort of gave his take on this upcoming season. And, early look at the lines, expectations, what life will be like without Bergeron and Krejci. And I want to start with Montgomery kind of went into what his top lines might look like come the start of the season. And the plan as of now, it seems pretty mapped out, is Van Riemsdyk with Zacha and Pastrnak, then DeBrusk, Coyle, and Marchand. I know we've talked at length about, the idea of potentially putting Frederic with Coyle, them two working really well together, wanting to see what you get out of them. But it feels like that's not going to be how it is to start, at least as of now, unless Frederic just kind of goes off in camp and Van Riemsdyk doesn't. What do you make of these lines early on here in August?
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily surprised with Coyle and Zacha being the top 6. I think, we've mentioned Morgan Geekie being a guy that could get those rests, but I feel like that's a break glass in case of emergency. It's not going right in mid-November. So the top 6, center-wise, doesn't make it doesn't have a lot of surprises. I think for me, those are your 2 best centers, the 2 guys that you kind of trusted last year in the playoffs to drive play and did a good job there. Again, wanting to do it through the adrenaline of a few playoff games, and I think you do over 82-game season. So again, we'll see how that maps out. Coyle with Marchand and DeBrusk, not much of a surprise. I think probably Coyle, in terms of his plays as a top 6 center, has probably more questions than Zacha in terms of just if he has the overall skill set to consistently do that. So I could see why you want to kind of load up that line with a guy like DeBrusk and a guy like Marchand, who both are, proven play drivers, Marchand especially, but I think DeBrusk last year showed quite a bit. Even though he was with Bergeron and Marchand, he still did a lot by himself just off of his own play. So I can see kind of loading up that line, kind of be your 2-way line now that Bergeron's gone. Coyle and DeBrusk really haven't played all that well together in the past, so we'll see how that kind of meshes. But I can see the thinking there. Zacha and Pastrnak makes plenty of sense. Keep those guys together. Zacha's probably your most gifted playmaker down the middle, I would say. So keep him with Pastrnak, who we played with all of last year. Keep that going. And then Van Riemsdyk is kind of the interesting one, right? Because I think when we talked about our different line combinations and we talked about like Frederic up with Coyle and Marchand, and people, I don't think people were especially large fans of that, but I think it was more not just that of Coyle and Frederic have played well together. It's more importantly, it was the domino effect of like, all right, then you can put DeBrusk back at left wing, put him with a very fast-paced line with Zacha and Pastrnak. And Riemsdyk, I think, I wouldn't say I'm high on him, but I think he has a lot to give to this team. I think he can be a guy that can give you 15, 20 goals in the right spot. But in terms of 5-on-5 play, that's where my biggest question mark, I think, is with him is he better suited there, or is he more on like a puck possession kind of cycling line with a guy like Geekie, as opposed to Zacha and Pastrnak, who I imagine, we'll see how the season plays out, that seems like not really a line that's a grind out, cycle the puck, possess the puck. It's kind of a quick strike. You kind of know where their strengths are. And I can see that's the line that you give 65, 70% ozone starts and let them kind of wreak havoc. But I don't know if Van Riemsdyk's that play style is conducive to that. So that's kind of the one question mark I have there. But again, even though Montgomery has this point going into it, stuff's very fluid. We know how this goes over the long course of the season. This line's going to be very different throughout the year. I mean, pretty much said like the bottom six is like,
who knows?
So again, yeah. So keep an open mind, but I can see why that's a solid jumping off point. And then we'll see kind of once training camp gets started preseason, how those things kind of fall into place.
Yeah, I feel like Van Riemsdyk, if you're next to Zacha and Pastrnak, you're going to pick up some 5-on-5 points, but you're right in terms of, can he keep up? Can he kind of play that style that Zacha and Pastrnak kind of trademarked this past year? The other thing, though, is on paper going into this season, right, from Montgomery's end, it's probably the most reliable on paper top six you could put together, right? Those are your six most reliable forwards that you have. And I guess if you look at it from Montgomery's perspective, right, like ownership still wants to win. The Jacobs are not looking to fully rebuild. They want playoff tickets. Like this is not a franchise that wants to go into, well, let's play every kid, we threw the Frederic idea out there and I still really like it as, hey, see what you got. Like I want them to see what they got this year. But from Montgomery's perspective, right? Yes, he won the Jack Adams this past season for the regular season success, but he fell on his face in the playoffs. I mean, he had a really bad 7-game series against Florida, and so did the team, by the way. I'm not saying it doesn't all fall on Montgomery, but Montgomery's end to a really good season was just a complete collapse. He does not want to go into this year and have a slow start or have, guys in places maybe that aren't popular, like a Frederic in the top six, and not perform well. And suddenly the team is, starting below 500 in their first 15 games. And I'm not saying that would happen with Frederic in the top six, but it's more likely to happen with Frederic in the top six, I think, than Van Riemsdyk. So I think in some ways it's sort of an added level of stability, that top six, to a very unstable forward grouping, it feels like.
Yeah. And again, it's such a fluid thing in terms of how these lines pan out and what you expect and all that stuff, that I'm sure if we guessed late August when we were going through these lines, how accurate we were, I feel like we probably weren't in terms of how these things overall panned out. Hell, we probably didn't even have like Frederic in like the third line. Like
no, we definitely last year.
So again, if he starts off on the third line and builds his way up and all of a sudden fights into those spots where he warrants a role higher up in the lineup, like the opportunity's there. That's the good thing, I think, when you look at these lines, is that you obviously have the guys who are set in stone, Marchand, Pastrnak, again, Zacha most likely, but other guys step up.
DeBrusk, hopefully.
Yeah, DeBrusk. But like if guys like Geeky take a step forward, Frederic, all these other players, there's room to bump up into the lineup. It's not like, it was a luxury for the Bruins, and like, don't get me wrong, it's much better when you have a top six that you can be like, all right, it is September 1st. We know what our top six is going to be. Like we have Bergeron, Krejci, Marchand, like it's a lot easier when it's that way. When there's going to be one guy I'm missing in the equation that could probably bump up there. You got like 3 or 4. It's probably a tougher battle for Montgomery in terms of finding the best possible guy, because you're going to be slotting a lot of guys into key spots, seeing where they best fit. Might lead to up and down results in terms of production out of the gate. But again, if you have that opportunity to grow, that should give guys like Frederic or Geeky or these other players more motivation to fight up into the lineup, because it's not like they're not trying to leapfrog a Hall of Famer on the depth chart, right? Like they've got, guys who are solid, can fill those roles, but it's not set in stone by any means.
No, it's not. Before we continue on with the conversation, I want to tell you about our friends over at Fanduel. Get ready for the NFL season with incredible offers from Fanduel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Plus, all customers who bet $5 will get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Now, obviously, is the best time to join FanDuel. The app is easy to use, and you can bet on everything from spreads to player props and more. So visit fanduel.com/Boston and kick off the NFL season with an offer you don't want to miss. Again, bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. And all customers who bet $5 will get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Again, visit fanduel.com/Boston. FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL. The most interesting quote I thought I saw from Montgomery in the story was on the center position. And he said, I think Zacha's ceiling is significantly higher. I guess he was talking about Coyle as well there. Not only is he physically prepared, more importantly, I believe he's ready for this mentally, for the kind of minutes, the responsibility of having to be played in all situations, which he did really well last year, but they're going to be more important minutes. But I just think he's mentally ready. He believes that he can do it. That's the biggest step for a player. I have a lot of confidence that our top two lines will be very good because I believe Charlie Coyle knows he can do the job and will do the job, and Zacha does too. But mainly that first part about Zacha's ceiling being significantly higher. I mean, I agree. I think Zacha, showed last year. And I think he showed, mainly last year that, he can thrive in the top six, whereas Coyle in past years has had sort of a tougher time centering the second line or jutting into that top six. What I would say, though, is Coyle, you sort of have an idea what you're going to get. There's more of a solid sample size, 2 40-point seasons the last 2 years. Before that, he was fairly reliable. I'm not saying he's a top six guy, but reliable. Zacha in New Jersey didn't work. That just really did not work. But obviously last year, just completely comes into his own and moves up. I'm curious, is there a chance? I saw a top six center, I saw a team's number one center ranking, I think for the Eastern Conference. I don't know who did it or who it was, but Zacha was 16th out of 16. And how much higher do you think Zacha can get this year?
It depends on, he's got, especially with Pastrnak next to him, a way to help out his numbers. But I also, you look at how he played last year. I don't think he was a liability. He has more room to grow, but he was a guy who hit 60 points last year. He wasn't even he was when he filled in for Krejci in the second line center spot. I think he had 8 points in 10 games. He was a productive player in that spot without having a proven playmaking conduit like Krejci, who's feeding him passes as well. When Zacha's on his game, when he's shooting the puck, especially, which I think we saw, I think it was very early on in camp. Montgomery's talking about how they wanted him to shoot more, and you can kind of see it when he's out there because he has a really underrated shot. He can do a lot of damage. So, is he going to be this second coming great two-way player? Is he going to all of a sudden break out for 85 points? No, but if he give you 65, 70 points in that spot, I think that's probably the best case scenario. But if he can give you that and drive play and keep up with a guy like Pastrnak, who again can kind of help out whoever he plays with, just as how great of a finisher he is, I think there's definitely room for improvement. Is he going to be a top 10, 15 center in the league? We'll see about that, right? But I think if you can be a guy that can hold play, drive play consistently, and just do your job in that role, and you have a lot of talent on your wing, I think that's what the Bruins are looking for. Same with Coyle. Coyle, if he gives you 45, 50 points plus, plays a really good two-way game, I think you'll take that for on a line with a guy like Marchand or DeBrus. I think that's the most important thing, is just filling in those roles, working with your line mates, and most importantly, just driving play is the biggest thing. So I think those are the expectations you should set. And, I don't see them I would see a situation where Zacha all of a sudden just plummets, and he's a 30-point guy, goes back to New Jersey, or Coyle's got 2 assists in 10 games to start the year when he's got guys like Marchand and DeBrus. I just don't see that with the supporting cast around them, especially.
Yeah, since 13-14, right? David Krejci's point totals: 69, 31, 63, 54, 44, 73, 43, 44, 56. I think that's attainable for Zacha. I don't think that's bananas. I think obviously the long-term stability that Krejci and Bergeron provided were outstanding, right? Franchise stalwarts. You add in, Bergeron's exceptional two-way play and him being, arguably the greatest two-way forward of all time. That's a different thing, but just point totals, right? Neither were off the charts points-wise. They were, Bergeron was 70, 80. Krejci was 50, 60, 70. Like Zacha should come somewhere within the 50, 60, 70 mark every year. I don't think that's this crazy thing to think. And by the way, I think the Bruins are paying him as such. I don't think that they think it's crazy attainable for him. So like, I don't think those numbers are, out of the realm of possibility for Zacha. I think the way he plays, I think having Pastrnak riding next to him, and if that's a partnership that now is the next, 4 or 5 years, like I think you have something there. Again, I'm not saying Zacha is going to be a top 5 center in the NHL. He's not going to be. I don't think he will. But in terms of, not being number 16 and moving into being, number 8 or 9 or 10,
right?
I don't think that's crazy. I think the tools are there. And this is sort of a good situation for him. So Zacha, I don't know. I think that there's, as you said, a consistent 70, 60 point threat. I don't see how that's like crazy. I know
Right.
Devils fans would say it is. Devils fans would be like, what? This guy, he's flash in the pan, lightning in a bottle. But I think there's a lot to his game that's good. And Coyle, again, if you can get 45, 55, hopefully maybe 60 points out of Coyle, like I don't know. I think you have something there. So
I still think, for him, and the most important thing is just a really good game. Like I even looked at his numbers last year. I forgot how much he played, like almost 2 minutes 30 on the PK, 30% of his own faceoffs. Like he was so good defensively that if he gives you 45 points and plays like that, again, I think if you play a whole year with Marchand and DeBrusk, what have you, I think like 40 points is like the floor in terms of, again, not saying he's going to be a 70-point guy, but 45, 55 points playing a really good two-way game out of that line of what you're trying to maybe augment it into, I think you'll be happy.
Yeah, I know. Again, is it Bergeron, Krejci? No. But for what they have, I think obviously people look and go, oh my God, what a downgrade. But I do think there is potential for Zacha to continue to rise and be a consistent scoring threat. And I think you're right. If Coyle could just kind of stick to that two-way game and let the points happen as they do, because Brad Marchand's on your left and DeBrusk is on your right, stuff's going to happen.
Right.
By the way, the third line that Montgomery mentioned, saying Frederic's going to be a big part of that third line, kind of goes in line with what we were talking about earlier this summer with Frederic. I know we mentioned him as more of, hey, give him a shot in the top 6. And I think a shot will come at some point. But I think the Bruins look at it as, hey, Charlie Coyle was the guy on the third line for, a long time. Not going to be that way anymore. Taylor Hall is gone. So you can't put him on the third line anymore. So Frederic's sort of your leftover guy there who you've got to rely upon a little bit. And I think I know they do look at Frederic as sort of that play driver. And I'm curious, like, can he be that? Because again, we were talking about him with the top 6 role. That was not going to be a play driving role. That was going to be, what he kind of was on the third line last year and being sort of not a passenger, but, filling his spot, doing his job, but not doing anything, crazy, and sort of seeing what that potential could be. This is going to be more of a leadership role in that third line, it feels like, if it starts out that way.
Yeah, and what Montgomery said, where they don't want him at center because they want to free him up a little bit. Like the onus is now here on Frederic to make the most of that, right? Like he's a guy that when he's on his game, and he's physical and he's annoying guys without, going over the line. And he's got a really great shot that I think really kind of showed out last year. I mean, he scores 17 goals. It's pretty obvious for how high his shooting percentage was, but he's a guy that can be an impact player if he brings it every night. And if their focus is just to free him up and have him stick to that style of play, he has the potential to be an impact third line guy. He's a guy that when he's playing at his best has a skill set that I think every team in the NHL would covet, of being a physical winger who can make plays on the forecheck, can finish plays, all that stuff. It's just going to be, can he consistently do that? And especially where he's going to be, as you said, like a featured guy in that line. Like that's going to be a third line that's going to be potentially all over the place, right? Like we can probably pencil in Geeky as the 3C for right now, but who else is it going to be, right? Is it Lauko? Is it, take your pick of all these guys in the bottom 6, Boquist, Chiasson. You got so many different guys.
Chiasson. Yeah, Montgomery spoke highly of Chiasson in this. He was saying that, in Detroit, he was terrific in front of the net on the power play, and he always finds his way into the lineup. Like, again, that's another guy that is going to be vying for bottom 6 minutes.
Yeah, so you have no shortage of different options out there, but you also, no shortage of options, but you don't really have like a set assortment there, right? Whereas like last year, I think one thing that helped out Frederic in terms of course, having a new coach, having, a different communication style, all those things, but it also helps when the entire year you're stable to the hip to one guy, right? Like he was with Coyle pretty much the entire year. And whether it's with him or the fact that you also had a guy who would be a top 6 player for 90% of the league, 95% in Taylor Hall as your other guy driving play as well, that helps out quite a bit. So it's going to be fascinating. They're obviously giving a lot of responsibility to Frederic, and we see how he kind of rolls with it. Because again, that third line, we've talked about it time and time again, how important your third line needs to be in terms of either being a defensive stopper, a line that adds extra offense to your group. It needs to be that second wave of whatever you're trying to accomplish there, and has to bring a lot of impact. And Frederic, if he's on his game, can do that, but we'll wait and see how he meshes with what's going to be a pretty new and rotating cast of characters on that line.
I'm also, you mentioned Hall. I'm fascinated what his connection's like with Connor Bedard. That's going to be an interesting thing all year because it feels like that's probably going to be his left wing. And I'm fascinated to see how that kind of plays out. Early in the year, Bruins fans, we get to see it because Chicago's coming, like, what is it, second home game?
October 11th.
Yeah.
First game.
That's right. First home game. So that'll be interesting to see Bedard make his debut at the Garden. We can save that, though. We can save that for October. That can be a fun October topic. Bigger picture. We discussed this a little at the end of the year. I know I kind of just hit on it saying Montgomery had a rough postseason. A lot of times last year, it felt like he didn't, he had Bergeron there. He had Krejci there. They were there much longer than him. It felt like there were times he deferred to Bergeron. It was Bergeron's room, which, by the way, makes sense. It's Patrice Bergeron. Yes. I get that. But this is sort of going to be the first year that he's the main voice. Not saying he wasn't last year, but again, Patrice Bergeron was there. At times, Montgomery made comments that made it kind of sound like, Montgomery was on the team and Bergeron was the coach, which again, makes some sense. There were times I wish, he's a little more strong in his, maybe, the last game of the season, things like that, which I understood. Again, I understand it at the time. But is he the right guy for this team? Is Montgomery the right guy for this group, which is a weird group where you've lost a lot from last year, but you're still trying to contend, but you have these young guys coming up, but none of them are big impact guys. It's all kind of guys that are vying for bottom 6 minutes. Beecher, Lauko, McLaughlin, throw Frederic in that mix. Like, is Montgomery the right guy for this group?
Yeah, I think we're probably about to find out, right? That goes in line with what we always talk about, right? With like just getting clarity this year. And, I think Montgomery, let's be clear. I think he deserves a lot of credit for how he, fit into that locker room last year and the messaging and so many guys played into it. But we'll see how it is this year, where it's a new cast of players, new leadership group. What people always talk about Montgomery is his communication style and how he can help you kind of navigate the ups and downs of the year. And again, you're probably gonna have more of those this year, even if like this team is a playoff team and is in the mix and all those things. It's not always going to be sunny when it's, Coyle and Zacha in the top 6, or a guy like Frederic in a featured role, or Lauko building off of last year, or all these younger players that are fighting for the lineup. When again, you look at this roster, just how many guys they have in the bottom 6. It's not going to be easy. Like you're going to require a lot of these guys to really kind of push.
They could create a whole team. They could create 4 lines out of their bottom 6.
Yes, exactly. So, it's going to be more of a slog, especially for the players who are either going to be handed more daunting assignments or have tougher matchups, all those things. So I think if you're the Bruins and you're, I'm not saying they already had the long game plan, but this was something that, yes, you wanted to switch things up. You wanted a new message with the established core you have, but also looking ahead when you knew that you only had a year or 2 left of Bergeron and Krejci, having a coach known for his communication style and, getting guys to play free, play to their strengths, that falls in line with, I think, what they're looking for this next wave of guys, where they're thrusting so many guys into different roles, hoping they succeed, but maybe having a guy like Montgomery in place who can kind of help you navigate through those challenges that present themselves is the right move. So we'll see. Again, it's all about, it's what's the Mike Tyson quote? Like, everyone has a plan to get punched in the face. We'll see what happens. Last year, didn't have a lot of situations where the Bruins were losing 4 or 5 or anything like that. Or it was really a case, last year it shows you how good the Bruins had it, where like both Olmark and Swayman both had like stinkers, like 2 or 3 in a row, right? Like they'd have maybe one, they'd had 2 losses in a row where you're like, oh, all right, well, It's not great. Shake it off. They bounce back. What happens now, right? If that happens, which is inevitable in the position in hockey, all those things. So it's going to be fascinating to see how he kind of goes through the expected course of an 82-game season. It's not going to be 135 points, 65 wins, all those things again. So we'll see how you kind of navigate those challenges, because whether it's things just falling back to the mean as we expected, or these guys in these different roles, the onus is going to have to fall on Montgomery to get the most out of this roster, where, again, look at it right now, whole lot up in the air in terms of how this lineup kind of plays out.
Yeah, one thing back to last season. I mean, Montgomery, as you said, I think he fit in that locker room perfectly in a sense. Like, he sort of let the players do their thing. He let them cook, as the kids say, and it worked out great. I am curious this year. Montgomery is very positive, and he's positive, especially with the media. I mean, even in this story with Conroy, it was very, good natured. It was, high spirits, high hopes. This is a very critical city with very passionate fans who have no problem turning on their team when things even just look like they could go wrong. We even saw this last year. I mean, there were, people were very down on the Bruins going into the season. People thought they were going to be terrible, and they were the greatest regular season team ever. So I am curious, as this season goes along and they hit their inevitable slumps, and, guy like Coyle scores, 1 point in, 9 games, something happens like that. What's his message to the fans and the media going to be? Is he still going to be positive? And if he's positive, which is fine, fans are going to get on him for it. And there's going to be heat coming from the outside. And I know the outside stuff shouldn't matter, but in this city where the noise is very loud, it can seep inside very quickly. And I am curious how that positivity kind of plays here when things aren't going perfectly. If he continues to sort of spin it as positive things, or if he tells it like it is. I think part of the reason Bruins fans love Bruce Cassidy was he didn't spin things like
sucked.
We sucked. I mean, he was honest with that stuff to a fault. I mean, that clearly did not help him long term here. So again, I'm not saying there's a right or wrong way for Montgomery to handle it, but this city can turn quickly. And just in that playoff series alone, people turned on him in a second. And then Cassidy goes and wins the cup, and people are, immediately, oh my God, what if? So, but again, you look at the his history of prior to the NHL working with younger players, USHL, had success at Denver, clearly can get younger guys to play for him. The question is, how do you blend this roster? How do you develop guys like Beecher and McLaughlin and Lauko and, not stifle their development when there are guys like Patrick Brown and Boquist and Chiasson and Milan Lucic and many other guys. So there's a lot for him to take on this year. It's going to be a very hard year they're not going to be terrible, but there's going to be a lot more challenges this year that I think last year maybe didn't pose. So should be interesting. I'm curious, as you are, for sort of how he fits in this group and what he can do for them. But Conor, what can people look forward to from you over at Boston.com and the Boston Globe?
Yeah, we're going to have you covered throughout these final weeks of the offseason. Had a piece breaking down DeBrusk's future with the team, just dropped on Sunday night. So we have that. We'll have more looking at just individual players, their roles, what to expect, what more room do they have to grow, all that stuff throughout the next couple of weeks until we finally, at last, get to training camp. So that'll be coming up shortly, thank goodness. And we'll have you covered with other stuff throughout Boston sports, of course. Patriots, I was at Mookie Betts' return at Fenway.
Ooh, how was that?
It's a blast. It was great. Great to see him back. Never should have traded him, but alas.
Nope, never should have.
Again, we'll have you cover everything big that's happening in Boston sports. So please read all of our stuff over at Boston.com. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can at ConorRyan_93.
Go do all that. That's Conor Ryan. I'm Evan Marinofsky. We're presented by Fanduel. You Bruins Beat listeners, have a great rest of your week.